Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. I feel very lucky that on this episode I went to Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia, and sat down with Dr. Ayanna Howard. Her accolades are so long. In 2003, she was named to the M.I.T Technology Review as one of the top 100 innovators in the world under the age of 35. She was featured in Time Magazine's Rise of the Machine article in 2004. In 2008, she received worldwide attention for her snow mote robots designed to study the impact of global warming on the Antarctic ice shelves. In 2013, she founded Robotics, which has released their first suite of therapy and educational products for children with special needs. She's worked at NASA. Let's see here. Over 20 years of research and development experience covering a number of projects supported by National Science Foundation, Procter & Gamble, NASA, ExxonMobil, Intel. It just goes on and on and on. Educator, researcher, innovator. Her academic career is incredible. Her contributions to robotics in the areas of artificial intelligence, they're bar none. So I was very excited, to say the least, to sit down and talk with her. And I'm not going to lie, fangirled a bit. I have a quote here. She said, "I believe that every engineer has a responsibility to make the world a better place. We are gifted with an amazing power to take people's wishes and make them a reality." She was really a delightful person to talk to, and it was very sweet of her to give me her time, considering how incredibly busy she is teaching and with all of the stuff she does. I was really excited about this conversation. I learned a lot. AI, artificial intelligence, has always been something that fascinates me, and especially where it's going. And I don't know if you've seen any of the videos out lately, that Boston Robotics with the dog robot, that's really blowing people's minds. And there's all sorts of stuff out there. I'm going to put videos of some things on the links page for you to check out, and some of the stuff we talk about, of course. And speaking of the links page, it's a great way to help support Hey Human. If you hear about something on the show, and I try and keep everything on the links page, and you can click on the link and it'll take you to Amazon. You can buy a book that we talk about, or a journal, or a movie, or whatever it is. It helps support Hey Human every time you go through Amazon, through either the links page or the portal at the top of heyhumanpodcast.com's website. So social media, you know how to find me at this point. Hey Human Podcast, and then my Twitter is Susan Ruthism, so it's a little bit different. Thanks for listening, as always. Rate and review on iTunes, Hey Human. It would be great if you did that. And I'm excited for this conversation and for you to hear it. So here we go. Hello, Dr. Ayanna Howard. Thanks for being on Hey Human.
Oh, thanks for the invite. I'm really excited about this.
I'm super excited. And thank you for saying yes.
No problem.
So here I am at Georgia Tech, which is exciting in its own right. I was wandering around and peeking in windows and stuff. Nobody arrested me, which is good.
No.
I was walking around with a backpack. I thought, I hope it's okay that I'm peeking around at everything, but there's so much to see.
It is. The students look in too.
Yeah. That's really exciting. Actually, I was walking around outside, and to see the students, and this is going to sound corny, but they all look so deep in thought and excited, and they're all smiling, and it's cool to see,
because it's an exciting place. I think one of the nice things about Georgia Tech is that you come to Georgia Tech because of the fact that it's one of the best engineering schools, but because we have these other fields, we have really good science and liberal arts and business, that the students really expand their knowledge base because of that, of that diversity of coming from this different mindset, but still everyone's a techie.
Yeah. And your background is in engineering.
My background is in engineering.
Yeah. And you went to Brown?
I went to Brown University. And the reason was because I didn't know what kind of engineer I wanted to be. I wanted to do robotics. I knew that. So I wanted to do robotics. I didn't know what that meant or what you had to be or do or have a career in. And so I did engineering because Brown allows you to explore all the different types of engineering.
Okay.
So all students took basically the same courses the first 2 years, and then you specialize. So it allowed me to kind of figure out while I was there what I wanted to be. And so you would call me a computer engineer from that.
Okay.
But again, I took the same courses as mechanical engineers and material science my first 2 years. So.
And your passion is robotics and then also artificial intelligence.
Yeah, robotics and AI.
So cool.
So what I was interested in, why robotics, was the fact that you can create these creatures that are intelligent. And they can function in ways to help people that is amazing. In order to do that, they have to have, so that's where the AI comes from. How do you enable a robot to think and have a brain?
Yeah.
It's the algorithms, and that's where the AI comes from.
And human beings, of course, we operate off of algorithms as well.
We operate off of algorithms and other things that we have yet to understand.
Yeah, exactly. We were talking before I put on the tape that I've been reading this, reading, you know how the Audible, God bless Audible. And right now we're in a part in the book where it's talking about the mind versus the brain.
Okay.
And it's fascinating because no matter what science discovers, they still can't prove that we're all not just some simulation that some kid in the year 2200 and something all is playing in his room.
Yeah, so I have...
It really hurts my head.
Well, but what's also fascinating, like some people, I'll get like with robotics, they'll say, well, robots can never be like real. They can never really have emotions. They're not really human. And I was like, you know what? We don't even know how to define humanity. Like if you look at the definition of consciousness and humanity, like you look at it, I'm like, hey, guess what? My robots, they kind of fit into that definition.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't understand ourselves.
Well, was it New Zealand? They declared animals to be sentient beings, which...
With rights.
With rights, which throws a wrench in all the people who said, oh, well, does that mean that they also have a soul? Because I've seen plenty of YouTube videos of the animals acting as if they do.
So, yeah, we don't
saving
know.
Each other, saving humans, so having a concept of life and what life means. And of course I always go to the bonobo monkeys who make love not war, which is so are they more evolved than we are, because instead of pulling out their guns they pull out their bits,
right? And they're much more collaborative, right?
They probably throw really good parties, is all I'm saying. So I have so many questions, but let's start at the beginning. You're a young girl and you're excited about robots. Why? How did that inspire you? And then, especially for girls. Girls aren't supposed to be into science. You know what I mean? There's that whole other thing.
And I think even now there's some of that. So back then I was middle school. So this is actually middle school. So I'll take you back.
And you're
a
not
couple
that
of
old,
years.
obviously.
Oh no. I'll be 29 forever.
Yeah. Amen.
Middle school, 12, 13 years old. I was always into science fiction. I mean, that was always the case. Anything science fiction, robotics, superheroes, I was there.
Yeah.
And what happened was I saw one show called The Bionic Woman. And I was just fascinated, right? And so again, I had seen the Bionic Man and Star Trek and Star Wars, and those didn't fascinate me as much. I mean, I kept watching them, but the Bionic Woman, for some reason, when I saw that, I was like, I want to do that. It was like the first time I could see myself doing something. Whereas the other ones, I was being entertained.
Now, I'm curious, did you want to do it because you wanted to be a bionic woman, or because you just thought the whole robotics part of it was...
I thought the whole I didn't want to be the bionic woman. So that was not...
Okay.
I didn't have those grandiose ideas of saving the world at the time.
Well, I didn't necessarily mean that. I meant like just the bits and pieces that were...
No, I wanted to build the bionic woman.
You wanted to build
I wanted to build it, and I just thought it was so cool.
Yeah.
And at the time, though, I didn't want to be an engineer, because I don't know if you remember the movie, but like all the cool people were like the doctors, and they had some engineers, but they were like the pocket protecting, in the lab coats, and I was like, oh, that's definitely
Before
not me.
Before it was cool to be
Before
smart.
It was cool, right.
Yeah.
But it was the doctors, and they were like, and then the general. so that's what I thought I wanted to do. Thought I wanted to go to med school.
Yeah.
So was going to go to med school and build a bionic woman. So that was my goal in life.
That's a good goal though for a kid.
That was it. I mean, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Did
your parents think you were crazy, or were they excited that?
No, they were always encouraging. So even early on, even when we were getting birthday gifts and gifts for the holidays, it was, what are you interested in? So I would get a Radio Shack, kit and a Rector set, but then I would get my little Sunshine Family Barbie dolls. Right? So it was just, it wasn't, so I didn't grow up in a household where there was a role for a girl or a role for a boy. It was like, oh, what do you want to do?
That's great.
You want to build.
Your parents were ahead of their time.
Yeah, they were very open. My dad's an engineer, so I think that has to do something of it.
That's good.
And so so I didn't have those concepts of I couldn't do it until much later. But at the time, I didn't think it was something I couldn't do.
Why later did you have that feeling that you couldn't?
So later on, what happens is that you start relying on you start hearing other people's opinions, right?
Yeah.
So as a kid, you just like do what you want to do, and your parents are like the most important thing in the world.
Yeah.
But then when you start hanging around with other kids, that are your friends, you think, and so you start listening, and so it's just a matter of growing up in a society that says girls can't do that, and I was like, oh. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be doing this.
And black woman.
Definitely
also,
didn't have that as a role model. And so, when you hear people saying, why are you here? This isn't what you're supposed to be doing.
Did you experience that a lot?
You experience it in different ways. I didn't experience it from my colleagues, my fellow students, because we were all struggling together.
Sure.
Right? It's like, oh my gosh, we have a test. Like, so it wasn't like, my mates. It was usually older folks.
Yeah.
Like, oh, are you supposed to be here? And that kind of thing. Very, so I think a lot of times, even today, people don't realize that some of the things they call it microaggression. Like they have a word now called microaggression.
They have a word for everything.
Right. Like back then they didn't have that word. Yeah. But really what it is like, I always say being killed by 1,000 paper cuts. Like one paper cut, it bothers you. It doesn't hurt.
That's a great expression.
But and so that's really what this whole kind of microaggressions are, is like, you have the one, but then you have another and you have another, and eventually, it becomes something that's real.
Yeah. The girl against Goliath.
There it is. Yeah. There it is. So going through that, the thing I keep saying, the thing that saved me was because I had such a good foundation.
Yeah. Thank God for your parents.
I know. It was just like, and I was confident, it was like, I was smart, right? Yeah. So I know I can do this, despite whatever anyone else says.
Did you have encouraging teachers too?
In high school, I had very encouraging teachers.
That's good.
I didn't go
right around ninth grade, right? That's when, or 7th to 9th grade, that's when girls start feeling inadequate.
I had very encouraging teachers. In middle school, particular, I was advanced in math, right? Mm-hmm. And so they actually made an exception, and I was in the math class, but because I was 2 grades ahead, she was like, okay, we're going to put you in the back, and we're going to give you the books, and I'm just going to, but I had to basically self-teach myself. Whoa. But it was like accepted, right? It wasn't no, you can't do this. This is not. This is
which
impossible.
Does happen to some kids,
right? They're accelerators. Like, well, no, we don't have that to offer. Mm-hmm. Sorry, you just have to be bored in this class. And so and again, that's because the teachers were like, yeah, we can figure this out. It doesn't make sense for her to repeat this math class if she's already taken it.
You bring up a good point too, the boredom thing, because I think when we were little, right? Boredom was our best friend. My mom used to always say, only a bore is bored. And then she'd open the front door. My parents would be like, see you later, alligator. And
explore.
And go explore your mind and the world at large. And do you think, and this is all conjecture, of course, but had you been brought up now, with the placation of all of our devices and the televisions and the cereals that we can, devour, and staying up all night to, all that stuff that is our opioid for the brain, right? Of the digital opioid. Mm-hmm. Do you think you still would have persevered? Or do you think?
I think nowadays, I think there's more exposure though. right? So back then, there wasn't the exposure. So it wouldn't be that you could, log on and watch your Disney and you saw an engineer, right? That was a girl. Like, that didn't happen.
Right.
It was just like the Bionic Woman. That was like the first time. And she wasn't an engineer, right? So I think now there's a lot more opportunities to be exposed because of these digital interfaces.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I think one of the issues now, though, is that it's easier to become... So you can see people that may look like you that are doing things that you are interested in, but the world is still, you still have naysayers. And so I think it's a little bit harder to cut those off because now it's maybe not the one person. Now as I log in and now I'm reading it and I'm seeing it and my feed is telling me maybe negative things and maybe I get positive. And so it's a little harder to try to filter out.
So it's double-edged sword.
It's a double-edged sword,
Yeah.
right? It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And so I don't... Yeah, and we don't know, in 20 years, is it going to be a better thing or...
Who knows?
We don't know yet.
Yeah.
We don't know.
We've got some humanity to catching up.
Yes, yes, we do.
All right, so you're in college, you're realizing that you're picking out your engineering thing, and then so before this episode will air, I'll have a little preamble with your very long list of accomplishments and awards and the fact that Time thinks you are as kick-ass can be. Time magazine, you're the top dog, which is awesome. So at what point did you say, okay, this is my journey now?
So it happened in undergrad.
Okay.
After my freshman year, I had my first internship at NASA.
Oh, cool.
And so again, people are like, oh, that's amazing. But so I grew up in Pasadena, and NASA JPL was like right there. So the engineers would come and they would do our science fair. So that again just exposed. It was like, yeah, of course, that's like a job. Like anyone can work at NASA, right? I didn't realize that that's not really the case, but at the time it was
only the two people that are 2 grades ahead in math get to be.
Well, it just made logical sense. I wanted to come back home. NASA did robotics. Yeah, that just makes sense, right? Yeah. So I just loved it. I mean, when you were there, they didn't treat you like you were a student. They treated you like, you were a real employee, right? And so you had jobs and responsibilities, and
that's the way to do it.
I think it was. It wasn't an expectation of, we have to babysit you. It was like, oh, we have something for you to do. Let's see how well you do. And it was up to you to either fail or succeed.
Right. And most people, when given that opportunity, rise to the occasion.
See, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
They really do.
So I love that. My first summer there, which is so funny, it was not a robotics project. It was a computer science project. And I had to, I'm going to date myself. I had learned Pascal because that was what we were learning in school.
Was that one of the first languages or something?
Oh, Pascal was not the first, but it was a very common one.
Okay.
Like no one knew Pascal. What is that? Yeah, so it was one of the
He's a math guy, I know that.
Math, Fortran, Pascal. There was a bunch of lists. There was a bunch of languages.
Okay.
And I had learned Pascal. And they were trying to convert from Fortran, another old language, to Pascal because Pascal was like, it was like the C of, it was like C# or C++ or Java of today.
I've heard of the C++.
Yeah, so that's a new one. Pascal was like the new programming language of the time.
Yeah.
And so they want to convert it from an older programming language to a newer one. So my first job was to not only convert the code, but then create a user interface for the scientists to use data for the telescope. So that was the thing. The telescope, the scientists wanted to grab the data. How do they basically access this in a really easy format instead of trying to do programming? So that's what I was doing.
That's right. It's not just somebody pointing the telescope. It's math.
It's math that tells like everything, where the telescope should point and like what resolution of the data and all of that is all math. And back then you would actually have to like write out all,
yourself.
It was you had the big servers and the systems to do that, but if you wanted to do some like really coarse calculations, I mean, you would just start deriving. And Fortran was designed to help a little with that, so you didn't have to drive everything.
Yeah.
But there was no interface. right? So
crazy.
So that was but that was also how I started also realizing that I was good at computer science. So I was majoring in engineering, but computer science allowed me to do what's called the algorithms, right? And I really liked that. It was basically taking math, which I'd always loved, and putting it into a format that other people could understand. And that was just like, I liked that. It was like this power that you had. And so I started becoming a hybrid. I would say engineering by my educational training and computer science by trade. So I was starting to program. I was starting to do things, well, they call hacking, but I was starting to, create these like nice, beautiful programs when I was in my summer internship, and then started to do research in robotics at Brown and was programming algorithms for robots to touch objects and explore. And so that's where I was like, this is it. I'm going to be doing this for like the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And then I knew it was robotics, right? So
do you remember the first robot you made?
The first robot I programmed was at Brown. It was a manipulator, which is an arm robot. And what the faculty member wanted to do was he wanted to figure out how to create, now it's easy, but so what happened was when you take an arm with an end effector manipulator and you want to grab something, how do you know how to grab it? Where do you put your end effector to pick it up? So what he wanted to do was take this arm and basically create a 3D model. So it wasn't, again, there was no this didn't exist. So his thing was, can we create?
There were no printers.
There was no, not the 3D, we were like dot matrix printers, but there was no 3D renderings and things like that. So what I had to do was program this robot to basically figure out how to touch the object without breaking it, and then follow the contour of the object and create a set of data points that then later on, when the robot encountered it, it knew what it had found. So we'd have different objects, you kind of map it out, and think of it as someone who, in the dark. So if you're in the dark and you're trying to find something, what do? You kind of reach.
I close my eyes.
You touch it, right? And
I close my eyes and then
you feel
so that my other senses take over.
Right.
Yeah.
And you feel, and you create a model, and you're like, oh, there's my glasses, or there's my phone, right?
Yeah.
By touch.
And your brain says, it's supposed to feel like this.
Yeah, it's supposed to feel like this, or it's supposed to have this shape. Right. So that's what we were doing.
Yeah.
But in our, crew 1991.
See, that blows my mind. Think about 1991, right? And you're just really scratching the surface of a robotic arm that is probably clumsy and still not quite getting things right.
Sure
Maybe
wasn't.
breaking a few things here and there. And now we have robotic exoskeletons, and we have nano things that go into the bloodstream and do...
Yes, and explore and do... Yes.
It's just... Excuse me?
No, I know we've come a long way.
In such a short amount of time.
Yeah,
it's
we have.
Astronomical.
We have. It is amazing. And it's so nice to actually be here and be able to witness this evolution. It's just
it must be cool watching the students in their own discoveries. And,
finding new things or new ways of doing things,
Yeah.
And pushing the state of the art.
Okay, so again, so many questions. All right, so you founded a company that helps people with physical needs match with. Talk about that a bit.
Okay, so I have founded a company called Robotics, and what we focus on is accessible STEM education. So the focus is on how do we, again, STEM opportunities. It's supposedly for everybody. There's access, right? Anybody can buy a Lego kit, but the fact is that a lot of times, by the time kids get to the point where they want to do, say, robotics, they're either like it or they don't, right? So there's no middle ground. So what we do, and what I noticed was that early on, kids are naturally curious. They want to explore, and that's the perfect scientist, right? What do scientists do? They see something, they see a phenomenon, and they say, why is this going on? And they figure it out, trial and error sometimes, and things like that. So what if we can do that very early on for very young kids? And how it ties into children with disabilities is that a lot of times, and I always say that a lot of kids think that they have a disability with respect to math and STEM, right? They're like, I'm not good at it. It's like, what?
Explain what STEM is, because I don't know that everybody knows what that
science,
is.
Science, technology, engineering, and math.
Yes.
So STEM covers basically all the things that are engineering, computer science, math. It's engineers, computer
all
scientists.
the pocket protector things.
All the pocket protectors that we would think about in the past. So that's what STEM is. So all of those subject matters.
Pens don't leak anymore, right? So you don't need the pocket protectors.
Well, you don't use pens. You don't use
stylus
pens anymore.
protectors.
Right, stylus protectors. And even then, you use, gestures and fingers.
It's so crazy.
Yeah, totally different. But you have things like, you have veneers that say, this is the one that I wear.
Oh, yes.
It says geek.
Yes, proud geek.
Right.
Yes.
So that's how you identify.
Right.
So no more pocket protector. So what we want to do is make STEM learning accessible irrespective of a child's ability, whether they have a classical disability, giving them the opportunity to learn, or someone who maybe just perceives that they may have a disability.
Yeah.
You give them the ability to learn.
Because from what I've read, there is a bias in schools, unfortunately, of female to male proportion with math. And there are those who say there isn't. I myself experienced it as a kid. So I remember loving math.
And then
having my 7th grade math teacher, she was so awful. And in that moment, it just...
I don't like this. I'm not good at it.
No, yeah.
I don't want to do this.
Yeah. And it's, it's interesting. And I think it does exist. The boys were treated differently than the girls in the math class, for sure. And maybe, it's been a few years since I was a kid, but I'd like to think it isn't as much like that.
Unfortunately, and I think it's just... sometimes people don't know or they don't realize that words have power, and even the way that you say it might be different. And with girls and boys, and I say girls and boys because I'm talking about girls, like 11, 12. They're still boys and girls, right? Yeah. So the boys gang up and the girls gang up, and the boys will say, "You're not good at that," not because they think it's because you're a girl. Sure. They're just like, girls can't do anything. I mean, it's just the way they are.
Right. So it's not just coming from teachers; it's also coming from fellow students.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then the death by a million paper cuts.
Yeah.
If the boys are saying you're not good at it. And then the teacher's like, oh, well, maybe we should do something else.
Yeah.
At some point you're like, oh, well, maybe I'm not that good.
That's why mirroring is so important. I just read Gina Davis Foundation. Didn't know that existed. Gina Davis being the actress.
Yes.
Who's also a member of Mensa, apparently. But her foundation researched all these different films to find out how many times a female was represented as a scientist. And it was... grossly lacking in comparison to how many men. And we can say, oh, big deal, it's just movies, but we seek out our other. We mirror off of what we see on television and film in everyday life. And so if it's underrepresented, as you were speaking to earlier, how are we to know what we're capable of if we don't see it in the adults that we are modeling? And they are our gods, for lack of a better word, because we're little, right? And everything is giant.
Exactly.
Everything, you're in the land of giants.
Right. And that's when I want to be like that person. Right. Because they're so cool.
But if you don't see something that looks like you, and that's for people of color, for females, and for boys and for people with disabilities, I mean, it's like, name it.
Across the board.
It's
you need to see the representation.
Like everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so important. I guess we're just now starting to realize that.
I think so. I think we are not only starting to realize it, but we're starting to realize the importance. So I think before people, they kind of knew, but I don't think they realized how important it was to make sure that you had enough representation. And I would say really in STEM, because I think technology is what drives our world. It's what makes life better, the quality across nations. The internet has been great because it's actually leveled some of aspects about information.
Sure.
And so these are the things that drive.
Now if we could just get the internet into homes that can afford it.
Right. So that would be the next, like universal access.
Yeah. That would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, back to robotics, AI.
Mm-hmm.
So in your world, they go together.
Correct. And
lately in the news, there's been all sorts of things. The robot dog, for example. But Boston Dynamics.
Oh,
the robot dog
that
opened the doors and flipped everyone out because Black Mirror had that episode with all the robot dogs. I find it fascinating. Here's the thing. So there's so many questions philosophically about artificial intelligence and where it's going and what it means. So human beings,
correct,
we have dominion on this planet, and some theorize it's because we use tools. Well, guess what? Other animals use tools.
Right.
And then you could say, oh, well, it's because we can speak. Well, so can other animals. They just have their own language. And then some theories say it's because human beings have the capacity to come together en masse, even with strangers, and form a united front and act in a manner that is humanity, whereas animals, when they see something that is not of their circle, they freak out and maybe challenge it, unless you're a bonobo. but so that being said, what happens if we create sentient beings, mechanical beings, right? And will they realize that if they can somehow operate en masse, will they form dominion over humans? That's one big fear, right?
Right, correct.
How do you find that line where you teach a robot new tricks, but not so many new tricks that it usurps its God, its creator?
Right. So, and I'm asked this quite a bit. So one of the things that I think we as roboticists, maybe we don't really explain. So one of the things is that when we're teaching these robots and we provide them the intelligence or the ability to learn, they're still learning in our human world, and they're learning based on my experiences, which are very much based on my human experiences.
You, the creator.
Me, the creator. And so if I think about a robot then growing up and expanding and, becoming, I always think about, it happens, but how many times do kids turn on their parents? It's very rare, right?
Well, they go through the teenage years.
They go through the teenage years, right? Sure. So they argue with their parents, but
they're not patricidal usually.
They're not usually, right?
Not
so
usually.
That's what we're saying. In the general scheme of things, you do have some exceptions.
Sure.
At the end of the day, kids, if they had even a halfway decent, like it's not abusive, but if you had a halfway decent relationship with your parents, you don't later on be like, oh, I want to annihilate my parents, right?
Right.
I still think that that's really the role of these robotic. They're learning in our human environment. They're learning our human values, whether they're good or bad. And so I think at the end, even if the robots become sentient or become smart, which is the fear, I still think at the end, you'll have some rogue robots, maybe. But I think just like our society, they're growing up in our society, right? We're treating them and we're putting them in our society.
We treat our fellow humans pretty crappy in some cases, though. So that's the other question. What happens if you're like, oh, I got a robot for Christmas, hooray! And it's got a, education robot level 10 or something. I don't know, whatever it is, and it can help around the house or take care of the babies or feed the dog or whatever. And what happens if it gets placed in a home?
That's abusive.
I'm fascinated by the rights of what I would consider a being, because it has come into existence. And to that point, when I watched the Boston Dynamic video, I watched a couple, and of course, like everyone else on the planet, when I opened the door, I went, holy crap! And both, that's so cool and that's so creepy.
Right.
Both the thoughts entered my brain. But here's the thing that I found fascinating about myself is in one of the videos, they showed a man
being abusive,
kicking the robot dog, and I recoiled as if he had kicked an actual dog.
Correct.
And I was so upset. And then for a second I went, wait a minute, that's a robot. And then I thought, fascinating. It's fascinating because our empathy for something that appears alive is still being triggered.
Yes.
So will our disdain. So will our... Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's like this whole... It just blew my brain apart, really.
So I think... And it's true. So, like, abuse is abuse. Whether it's abuse for an animal, and maybe you don't even like animals, right? But when you see it, it triggers something. I think because the way we design robots, we're trying to emulate humans, right? So we're emulating this aspect of a living creature, right? And so that does trigger at an emotional, reactive level. And I think, though, what happens is when people see abuse, there's no question, right? I mean, there is no question. It's not like, oh, that's not it. No. There is no question when you see something that's wrong. right? Now, whether something is right, I mean, that might be, but when you see something wrong, there's no question. And so I think even with robotic systems, we can put, and this goes with this whole aspect of ensuring transparency and trust in our systems. I mean, we can put in core values that are at least based on what we believe as a society is right.
The robot commandments.
And I won't even put it as the robot commandments, but things that...
I watched a video of you where you were talking about that, so please...
because it's more than that.
Yeah.
Because, the commandments...
I called it commandments, you didn't, but I'm just saying that...
because they actually...
They were tenets, how about
they're
that?
tenets,
yeah.
And even the tenets, sometimes
they kind of reminded me of the commandments, though.
No. I mean, they were. That's what I was referring to.
Yeah.
Like, we do need to have some standards.
Yeah, thou shalt not kill your person. That's what,
Right. You shouldn't. But then again, we have wars, right?
Right.
So if I create a robot soldier...
Yeah. The lines start getting real fuzzy real fast.
Right. But yet, even in war, we have conventions, right? So I think that so as a society, we have created these standards of behavior that everyone understands, with exceptions as well.
Yeah.
Even in war, you don't kill civilians, right? If you're...
So supposedly.
Yeah, and there's some, right? So,
yeah.
But I think everyone, and that's why when certain things happen in the news, why we as a society get so upset is because we're saying, well, what happened is violating our understanding of a societal norm.
Right. Our humanity.
Our humanity.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think with robotics, and in fact, there's a bunch of different groups that are looking at this. Like, how do we ensure that we put in these understood societal norms and values that everyone accepts? Now, whether people follow them or not is a whole nother question.
Sure.
But there are these things that are absolutely wrong that everyone will say, that's wrong.
Right.
And people still do it, but we do know that it's wrong. And I almost believe that robots could be held more accountable because the reason why people do things that are typically wrong is either their upbringing, right?
Sure.
But they know it's wrong. They just decide that no,
unless
this is not.
Socio or psychopath.
Right. And
can AIs be psychopathic?
I'm gonna say no.
Okay.
And I say
even virally.
If someone implants, so again, in that case,
if there's hackers out there that can hack into this, that, and the other, could they not hack into?
They could, but then for folks that that's what medicines are for, right?
That's exactly right. We hack our systems all the time.
Right. So I think we can do the reverse. If someone comes in and does some viral implant that switches the ethical behavior, I think we can also have a solution. I mean, whatever your opinion is on medicine or not, we can have the equivalent solution, I think.
So when you have somebody like, is it Sophia?
So, yes.
Sophia, the citizen robot, the Arab, Saudi Arabia. Gave her. I mean, I don't even know what's appropriate pronoun wise, but gave Sophia.
She simulates and emulates in the physical form a female.
A female.
Right.
And is she, the things that she says, I haven't done a deep dive on her, the things that she's saying, is she being manipulated to say these things, or is she coming up with that through a series of zeros and ones for herself?
She's programmed.
She's programmed.
She's programmed.
Okay, so in your work, you're developing AI that is going to be thinking for itself to some degree, and from what I've read, we've gotten to about 4th grade, 3rd grade as far as like blocks and round peg, square holes type.
Yeah, but not 3rd grade in terms of overall intelligence.
Not functioning
close.
In society,
right.
But in mirroring, right?
Yeah. So we're really good at if we have a task that has some very clearly articulated rules, we're pretty good at learning the myriad variations of that.
We humans?
No.
AI.
AI.
Got it.
Right? So if I know that there's like an outcome, and the outcome maybe varies some, but there's like sort of one outcome, and maybe the inputs are all different, we're pretty good at learning that one thing. But don't change much later. I mean,
right.
Don't take it and say, oh, well, you can pick up blocks. Well, then maybe you can now pick up dishes, right? It's not the same.
Okay.
That more of that generalization is what we're trying to do. Like, how do we generalize even just a little bit? And then how do we generalize even more and more? I mean, that's really where we're trying to get these systems, but we're not there yet. We can do something. If a third grader can do this one task very well, we can learn that. But don't ask us to do things that are outside of that one task.
Yeah. One of the things that fascinates me is the ability of people who have, let's say, lost mobility in their arm or something, and they've got something implanted in their brain that then all they have to do is think, and the new robotic
signal, right.
arm, how does that work in layman's terms?
Yes.
Me being the layman.
No, so what happens is the brain is and we still don't understand the brain,
no.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but we do know that there's different parts of the brain that give signals. So like the motor cortex. So when I want to do something, what happens is before I even physically move, there's a signal. My brain is processing, and we call it an intent. Like, I want to move. There's a signal before my hand even gets that signal. So what they're doing is they're tapping into that electronic signal. So there's an electrical signal that comes that then says, okay, this is the command to move. So they're tapping into that to then command the robot to move.
So crazy.
And there's different ways. So there's one that's based on the brain, and then there's others that's based on muscles. So they actually look at the muscle contraction, which is one level removed from the brain function. So before you move your arm, there's some muscles that are about to contract and enable that to happen.
Right.
Can we grab that to then, because my hand now no longer is there, my physical hand,
right.
I have a robot hand, can we take that same signal and transform it to the signal for the robot?
And what's wild is that the brain acts in such a way that, in fact, that robot arm will eventually feel like your own arm. The brain will adapt.
Yeah, well, they say in a lot of cases in the healthcare medical that they call it the phantom.
Yeah,
it's the phantom.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, like.
Right.
You don't even have to have a robot arm to actually.
It can be done with mirrors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and so that sensation is just tapping into the natural inclination of the way that our memory and the information is already stored.
There's a great video of that. I'll put it on my Hey Human podcast link page because it's really cool to see with the person with the mirror, and it's so crazy. I love it. Okay, I have notes because I just have so many questions. First of all, let's talk about sex robots. Okay, because that's certainly on people's minds. And again, that's that other question of what is morally or ethically okay if these AIs are being developed to be sexual counterparts to a person and they don't get a say-so. They're just being created. That's again that fuzzy line, but it's a machine. But I reacted when the dog got kicked. You know what I mean? It's where are these lines crossed? And then I think I wouldn't mind a robot boyfriend. I mean, he sounds pretty perfect.
So again, this is a scenario, and that debate has. There are some who are like, absolutely not, because of the fact that consent is consent, right? And if you don't give even a robot, but something that we think of as living, the ability to consent, then we put people in jail for that, right? So why?
It's very gray.
Right. And so I think right now, my feeling is that it's not going to be ordained as something that is acceptable, but yet we also know that the practice happens, right?
Sure.
So the practice is going to happen, but I don't think as a society we are, and this is just based on kind of the conversation, I don't think as a society we're going to say, it's okay to XYZ. Right. But we all know.
Unless you have the AI saying, yeah, I'm down. I mean, what
in terms of consent, right.
In terms of consent.
Right.
So how, if you, Dr. Howard, you're training these AIs to learn via mirroring, how are you getting it to the point where it is beginning to think for itself? From my understanding with computers, and maybe it's just in science fiction, which I adore as well, in that it learns upon itself.
Right.
So how do you get it to that?
To that level, so we're not there yet. But so if you think about how and I always use kids because kids, if you think about, they're born, they have basic reactive functions, emotions, but they don't even walk, right? So
right, we have to keep them alive.
We have to keep them alive, right? And so if you look at a child from an infant and how they grow and learn, so some of the things, if you think about how these building blocks happen, a lot of time is based on survival, right? A child cries because they know they are dependent. And they very soon realize that if I cry, the ones that I'm dependent on will react, right? And they will continue to their 5 years old crying if they have parents that react in that way. And so I think even in that case, I think that these robots will have goals, and we provide them these building blocks. And how, if you think about how a real learning algorithm could kind of evolve, is you have a goal. So the one thing is the goal is provided by who? We don't know, right? But then you have a goal, we provide you building blocks, and we know that these building blocks could eventually lead you to this goal. But we don't tell you, and we let the environment teach you, right? So you as a robot, you explore, and you come to something and you get a positive feedback. So, maybe it's energy, power, I figured out that if I move to that thing in the corner and I plug myself in, I get power and I can continue doing this, right? So eventually power, energy is good, which is like food.
Is that response an actual response, or is it, do you know what I mean? Like, is it I plug in and get more power, which I need, or am I actually excited about the fact that I'm getting more power?
Well, so that's the thing.
Because little babies get excited.
They get excited.
They laugh and they cry and
they have an emotion. So that's a reactive emotion. But why? And I program emotions on my robots, right?
Sure.
And I actually do it because of people, not necessarily because of the robot, because people
want that.
People want
they
that.
Need that.
They need that kind of as a feedback. So a person is more likely to want to teach a robot if the robot is providing them emotional feedback.
Yeah.
So
it's like that terry cloth monkey versus the wire mesh monkey studies in the 70s. Yeah. It's
different reaction, right?
It's fascinating.
Different reaction
well.
Because of us.
Yeah.
And so I think that so I get happy versus I get energy to continue my job. I think fundamentally they're the same thing, right? They achieve the same objective, and we will call it, in a human, we call it happy, right? But as an example, when kids eat candy, it's a good thing, right? They get really happy. They see candy, it's like, right? Well, if you think about it, what is it? No. So what happens is with candy, because of the sugar, you take it, and there's actually this reaction in your body.
Right, the brain goes zing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you being happy is just an anticipation of feeling that zing.
It's Pavlovian. Yeah.
I haven't heard that worded except in the dictionary.
Oh, really? But isn't that what that is?
It is. I'm just like, I've not actually heard that verbally spoken.
I'm actually 4,000 years old.
So for a robot, I can program the emotions or I don't, but it's the same objective, just like with a child.
So why not program AIs the way an animal learns instead? Because we are maybe the only species that takes freaking forever to get out of the nest, right? It takes forever until we can take care of ourselves, until we can walk, until we can, function as you throw a little kid in the woods, it dies. You throw a baby giraffe in the,
it has a height, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So why do we start way up there? If have they already tried to teach AIs the way animals learn?
Yeah, so there are AIs. So there are robot dogs, for example.
Like the one
like the one you're talking about. Yeah. But even so Sony came up with, they're releasing it now. So Sony Aibo, which is 10 years, the very first version, probably about 10 years ago. It was a evolving animal, that it would evolve based on its interactions with you. And so your Aibo might be slightly different than my Aibo because of the interaction. So if you were a very loving person, your Aibo might be more lively. I'm not just kind of paraphrasing.
Yeah, sure.
So that was early versions of
I never even heard of this. I meant to go look at
Aibo. So they released it They are about to release it this year. They announced it, so I don't know if you can buy it now. So they're releasing it with new, updated versions. So I have no idea, because then it was actually pretty advanced in terms of what was available.
Sure.
So I have no idea what it's going to be like now.
I need to renew my Wired subscription.
Oh, yeah, it would have, I'm sure.
It would have been in there.
I'm sure.
I haven't had that magazine forever,
I'm sure.
I loved it. It's one of the few magazines I'd read cover to cover.
Because it always has and they're like
fascinating.
They're like such nice snippets. I mean, you know, it wasn't like 5 pages of stuff. It was
you could consume it.
Yeah,
for sure. It's funny you brought up the Bionic Woman, because this is one of the things I talked about. Human beings, we get plastic surgery. So here's the thing. A lot of the rhetoric is, oh my God, no, it's Terminator. We're all going to die. And then I think about things like the science of, as we spoke of, the nano bloodstream robots that go check things out and see what's what, and maybe eventually will
at some point
replace
heal.
valves and heal and all that kind of stuff. So we are already a society that uses science to improve our breasts or our lips or our eyes or our butts or whatever it is, or even pacemakers or
which is extending our life,
any of that stuff. So we already are kind of in that realm. In fact, probably more than kind of, we are in that realm. So is there a $6 million man and a bionic woman in the future? Do you think it's gonna go in that direction? This is conjecture, but I imagine that eventually the Olympics will look like a bunch of robots, robot legs or something, I don't know.
Yeah. So I think so. And why I say that, so one, it's not an elective surgery right now, right? So when people have bionic parts, it's typically
because they have to,
right? It's
but
not
people
elective.
freak out about getting implants to open doors and things. That company in Sweden,
right,
which I thought was fascinating, because they don't freak out to get the.
No, they don't. And I think it's because, and so what I'm saying is that's why this is going to happen, right? I think it's just our acceptance, because right now that implants and even the fingers, I've seen the fingers, but those
where they can swipe at things.
Yeah, because they have like RFID, but so those are not. You wouldn't call them necessarily as invasive. So they require some surgery, but even the people who are doing the surgery, they're,
right.
It's not a major surgery. I mean, you could have infection, but it's not a major surgery.
Right.
But
no big organs.
No big organs.
Right.
But when we do these like kind of bionics, that's actually considered close to being a major surgery if we're connecting them to, say, nerves. Right? So that's like major surgery. There's always complications. So the risk is high, but if you want something, then the risk kind of outweighs.
And you're talking about the people that already do robotic arms.
Yes, who have the robotic
Sure.
arms. And so think of this now, that when that becomes a little more streamlined, i.e. it doesn't become like a major complicated surgery, maybe it becomes this like adapter and we can figure out how to do non-invasive control of robotic, like these kind of things, then it becomes now I have to maybe hack off my arm or leg, which is not necessarily acceptable now.
Although people do it. Body dysmorphia, there are some people that are like, this is not my leg, take it off.
Right.
And there are some doctors that will.
And they will, because it's an adult and they can do this.
Yeah.
But I think it becomes more and more acceptable.
Right.
More and more acceptable. I mean, I just remember back in the day, ear piercing. Remember? So if you
do. My dad wouldn't let me pierce my ears till I was 15.
That was like not done unless you were like basically of age of consent.
Right.
And 2 ears. Oh my gosh, you were like.
Oh, when my brother got his ears pierced, my dad like totally freaked out.
Like probably disowned him for like 2 weeks. Right? Right? Yeah. So I mean, and now it's just, it's basically just don't wear your earrings if you have like 5 of them to a job interview. Right? But once you get the job.
But even now, I think that tattoos are more acceptable.
I think so. And that's
there's
what I'm
the
saying.
lizard guy that split his tongue, and
it becomes more.
That's intense, but yeah. There's penis flailing. I mean, there's all sorts
of weird
stuff.
Yeah,
there's stuff, but everybody's got a thing.
And so I think that's the norm start changing and shifting.
Yeah, I foresee a future where that is not unheard of, especially things like, vision. We get LASIK now, so why wouldn't, if it's possible, the optic nerve is complicated, but let's just say it's possible, why wouldn't you want robot eyes?
Yeah.
Of course you would.
If the positives outweigh the complications.
Absolutely. Because back in the day, they used diamond cutters to cut your eye for what was the radiokeratotomy. And now it's like 10 minutes.
Right.
And there's
and
Groupons.
And I know.
It's a Groupon. I look at thinking, I don't know.
No, I remember when that was first done, it came out, that was considered a complication, right? Because it was like you just do one eye because you might be blinded in that one eye, right? That was like it was a fear, there was a risk. And now, and in fact, if you have certain characteristics, insurance pays for it. Right? Whereas before it was like you couldn't even get insurance. That was like insurance, no, because it's too risk. And if any complications happen, insurance wouldn't cover anything after.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I don't know if in our lifetime, but to see what is coming down the way. I'm fascinated by it. It makes you want to live forever. It does. I mean,
well, when you can transplant brains.
Yeah, right. I like to keep the brain I have, only just keep it running. I always say it to my parents. They're used to me being weird. And I always say to my dad, I'm like, okay, when you die, I'm just gonna put you in a jar and talk to you like you're nothing. He said, that sounds interesting. I said, they'll be able to do that. I'm sure of it. Okay, so can human memories be entered into an artificial intelligence so that they have a response that is the way we might respond to fear or hunger or whatever? So we kind of talked about it a little bit. This is actually an actual memory being implanted into, and then does that mean we become immortal at some point? Because before we die, we sign the paper, we pay the $10,000, sort of like the cryogenic Walt Disney, and say, I want all of my existence put into this AI, and that becomes me.
Right.
And then what? Then eventually
and so for this one, I really, we don't understand the brain.
Right.
We don't even there's some theories of where memory exists, like in the brain, but if we carve that out, it doesn't give us what we need.
No,
right?
Because memories are just memories of memories. It's not even a real thing.
Right.
They're all illusionary.
Since we don't understand that, it's hard to even figure out how to extract the data. So with that caveat, if we knew how to extract memories as bits and bytes, then I can see us being able to because it's bits and bytes. But I think for that I don't know if we'll ever be able to get to the point of extracting those kind of memories. Now, the best that we can do is wear a camcorder, we're born and we wear wearables and sensors that collects all the data that our senses have.
Black Mirror.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
That's the closest we could do it. So then maybe we can reconstruct and learn based on, because now we have all the data that was provided to us that we learned from.
Right. Or what about bringing grandma in to talk to the AI and telling, telling all the stories to AI? Will it then?
Because I think there's something about, so us as human beings, the way we learn incorporates our senses, right? We see the way we get feedback, voice, and at some point, even how babies, it always fascinates me. So babies don't understand, or I'm not even gonna say that. So they haven't grasped the vocabulary, right?
Right.
But they understand, right? So
sure,
you can have
tone,
it's
face,
right?
Yeah.
So all those things allow a child to learn. Grandma telling a story, you're not going to get that same kind of learning experience.
Sure. Although, don't AIs watch your face and adjust to that?
They do, but grandma telling the story is not the same as me experiencing the story.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's fascinating.
But grandma telling the story, we can learn stuff, because that's how morals come about, and that's how some aspects of what to do. So think about a lot of times why kids might still talk to their moms even though they're 40, right? It's I'm having a problem, I need some advice, right? And mom or grandma might give advice through a story, may not say, oh, this is what you should do, but says, hey, I remember when I was a little girl, right?
The oral tradition
is still strong. So I think that is a component of learning, but it's not the only one.
Old habits die hard. We are at the very root of us, the very beginning of us, right?
Yes.
I mean,
that's where that oral history comes from.
Yeah, which I love. Okay, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. This is so I could talk to you for days. We are developing machines that will eventually completely take over certain jobs, right? We already have done that, automotive, in cars and all that kind of stuff. And now we have, they're starting to do the self-driving car. And do you think there will be a human backlash when suddenly all of our bus drivers are just self-driving buses? Or where does that figure in? Do you guys think about that stuff?
We do. So there's two facts. One is that robots will take over certain jobs. We know that based on history. It's technology. It's not just robots. It's technology.
Technology, yeah.
Right? And robots is now the next technology. But the fact also is that new jobs will be created because of that. And again, if you look at history, that's also been the case. Anytime something has happened, new jobs came up. Some of it was service types of jobs because now people have more disposable income, or they have more time, or they're not in the fields, and so now they're in the home. And what do you do when you're in the home?
Sure.
So there will be new jobs.
The call for computer programming and engineering, all that stuff is huge now.
That will be increased. And there's jobs, and so we and the economists have stated that there are jobs that will come up in the next 20 years that we have no clue about.
We haven't even thought them up yet.
We haven't thought about them yet because these things will happen. It might be I always say, who's the mechanic that services our robot bus drivers, right? It's not going to be a mechanic. It's going to be some hybrid hands-on programmer / we don't know. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
What happens when there's a game that goes on? Who's going to manage the fact that the buses are on a route, right?
Yeah.
And now you have a game, and it's like, okay, there has to be some kind of...
But can a computer not figure that out?
Except that these things are... For example, with a computer, some things are going to happen so rarely that it may not be worth investing in a whole new computer programmer to our computer AI because it only happens how many times is Atlanta going to go to the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be once every year
or
once every month. It's going to be, and so when that thing happens, it's like there should be a person that's called the mediator, because these are going to be different things. Things are going to happen that are just so outside the norm, but they're going to happen all the time, but they're going to happen in all these different domains that we may not can necessarily learn from them. And I'm just kind of...
Yeah, it's conjecture. It's all we can do, really.
Yeah. But there will... Fact is that there will be jobs that will occur, that will be created, that don't exist now. Guaranteed.
Yes. And then eventually there'll probably be artificial intelligent beings that are taking care of the higher intelligent, and then they'll become their own... There'll be their own strata as there are for human. It's so fascinating to chew on philosophically, emotionally, scientifically. I can understand why anyone would be drawn to this field. It's got to be every day. You must be just out of your mind excited.
It's exciting, and one of the things is that it's such a humanistic kind of thing. Like, even though we're creating new technologies, and you think about it as like, oh, you're creating technology to destroy the world, or you're creating... It's like... But the things that we as roboticists, we think about all the time is we think about these things like, because we do need people. The reason why we do this is to enhance quality of life. And if you don't have lives, then why are we doing this? And so we are always thinking about, what is the return on this? Is this worth the risks? Are the benefits, because there's great, great benefits, but there might be potentially risk. And so anything we do, we think about the risks as well. And
occasionally a plane falls out of the sky. It doesn't happen very often.
But it
still
does.
The safest mode of transportation certainly beats cars. And yet... And
we don't say, oh, no planes ever are going to ever fly.
Yeah. I may email you every once in a while with questions.
Yes. I actually like this topic because, again, I live this now every day. And one of the... like I said, I'm cool now. Before...
You were always cool.
I was always cool. No one... Yeah, but robotics was still so... like people didn't see robots as being in their lives.
Yeah.
And now they are. And so it's really rewarding because it's like, 1991, right? And now I'm like, oh, and now people can see what a 1991 robot, like what it evolved to. And so it's nice being like on the forefront of this, but there's also a great responsibility because we are on the forefront of this. And so it's exciting, it's interesting, but there is a great sense of responsibility that we do feel as roboticists.
Yeah, the future is bold and wonderful and exciting, and I'm so happy to meet you.
No, this is fun.
Thank
this
you.
was definitely fun.
Thank you for
inviting.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.